Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Andy Taylor with Cloud Strategies, and I want to welcome you to our latest webinar, Establishing Your Identity in the Cloud. So I'm going to start this out with a little scenario. Just imagine that you are the owner of the following IT environment. You've got about 4,000 users, 5 locations worldwide, and today each person on the network has 2 accounts that they use. They have one cloud ID, and they have one ID in your local Active Directory environment. So in that scenario, imagine if you could accomplish the following: reduce your help desk calls by up to 50%, save $250,000 per year, and reduce the amount of time required to provision, deprovision, and disable accounts by 50%. So that is a great example of the power of harnessing identity management in the cloud. And that's essentially what we're here to talk about today. So we'll go through our agenda here. We are going to make some introductions, talk about cloud strategies and who we are. We will go through some common, we will talk about identity management itself. What is it? Why is it important? Some common cloud identity scenarios that you see out there. Then we're going to talk specifically about Microsoft solutions as they pertain to cloud identity, and then we're going to wrap it up with where this all leads, a call to action, and allow you to ask some questions at the end. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about Cloud Strategies, just to let you know who we are. Cloud Strategies is a born in the cloud partner. We were the very first Microsoft born in the cloud partner. That means that we are totally dedicated to cloud solutions. We actually eat our own dog food, as they say. We run our entire business based on cloud applications and services. We've got some of our key partnerships listed here, as well as our aspects of our relationship with Microsoft, our cloud expertise there. This is on to our next slide. This is a small sampling of the 300 plus clients we've actually moved to the cloud. So we are definitely in this for the long haul. We've been around for 4 years, and we are definitely here to be your partner to assist you with moving to the cloud. So going into identity management, the concept itself. So identity management, this is a decent definition here. We're identifying individuals in a system or systems and controlling access to the resources. And there are really 2 key concepts that you need in order to identify identity management. One of them is authentication. So authentication is verifying that a user, device, or service has that you've received this information about a user, device, or a service, and that it is who it claims to be. So it's sort of like when I present my driver's license. The driver's license is when I'm showing that at any place, like for example at the airport, that's verifying that I'm who I claim to be. Authorization, on the other hand, is determining which actions that an entity is actually authorized to perform on the network. So with the driver's license scenario, I would actually present that at my local liquor store, and I would be authorized, because I am well over 21, to purchase alcohol. So that's an example of authorization based on the identification I supply. So then going further into what identity management means, essentially you're taking control of those 2 things, authentication, authorization. You're also managing accounts. You're doing account management, which means provisioning, attribute updates, and deprovisioning. That's all the things that you do with accounts on your network when you have to create them, when you have to change a password, when you have to add someone to a group, give them access somewhere. And then finally, identity management incorporates auditing and traceability of the account usage. So what the accounts are actually being used for, what's actually taking place in a particular system as you're managing it. So to the end user, identity management is pretty much transparent. It's not something that the end user typically sees, but the thing that it does pertain to them, what they do see is which accounts do they need, what usernames and passwords do they need to sign in, how do they sign in, and then which resources can a user access. So an unfortunate example in terms of authorization in this scenario is if you look at the recent world events and the actions of Edward Snowden. So regardless of what you think of Edward's actions, essentially, you have a situation where he had a greater level of authorization than he should have had in the environment he was operating in. He clearly, and this is the one fact upon everyone seems to agree, is the fact that he actually was authorized for certain things, but based on his role in the organization, the authorization was set up so that he was able to get to a lot more information than he actually needed to do his job. So, why is identity management important? So, some big factors here. One of them is cost. So as the world ever grows more complex and there's more cloud services, more applications, there's more applications that are local on-premise as well. There's more accounts, more passwords to manage. Just in everyone's personal life, we all have accounts and passwords on hundreds of websites. Every new account that's managed in a corporate environment creates an additional management cost. There's an additional cost to manage that account, to actually validate that the correct people have the correct accounts assigned, and to monitor those accounts and make sure they're being used appropriately. The security risks are another factor. One thing that happens a lot is when you have companies that have employees coming and going, which happens more frequently than it's ever happened before in history, you frequently have a situation where someone leaves the company, and it's very important that you lock down their access. They are not actually able to access information on the company network after they are no longer an employee. So that's critical. Role-based authorization, again, that's like I was talking about before, that's critical to make sure that a person, for example, who is in human resources has access to all the things that he or she needs. That's going to be very different from the other things that perhaps the CFO might need to see in the organization. Both of those roles are going to have very specific things that they're going to need access to on the network. They're going to be very different from each other. So making sure that the role-based authorization is critical is critical to managing your business, and that's another reason for the importance of identity management. And then manual processes as far as security risks. The more manual all the processes are for managing security, the more probability there is for error, and they are time consuming. And in the situation where someone leaves the company, if they have 5 different accounts that need to be disabled, if those all have to be disabled manually, and you get short notice that person's leaving, that can be an area of risk there. Another reason is regulatory compliance. With all the regulatory bodies out there managing different businesses, it actually increases the risk there as well. In any kind of organization, there's always a chance you could be audited, and not having the records to be able to produce can be a very big risk for a business there. So then the other reason, advancing to the next slide here, the other reason why identity management is important is cloud computing. So cloud computing is wonderful, and as I stated earlier, we are total believers in the cloud here, cloud strategies, but it does actually increase the amount of accounts people have. In general, it actually increases the need for identity management rather than decreasing it in most situations. And the reason, there's a couple reasons for that. One is that there are many situations where companies have some sort of on-premises environment. Now, here at Cloud Strategies, we live in a pure cloud environment. We don't have any on-premises infrastructure to speak of other than our test environments. But we're not typical. We're a pretty small company, and we're able to operate that way. A lot of larger companies have a substantial investment in on-premises hardware and software. In those situations, it's very difficult to immediately get rid of all of that. So you're stuck in a situation where you're having to manage both. You've got a hybrid between the cloud and on-premises. In addition to that, there are multiple cloud providers out there. Now, I talked a little bit about Microsoft, but there are many other cloud providers out there, as you're aware. I listed Salesforce.com and Amazon here as a couple other examples. There's also Google. There's literally hundreds of cloud providers out there, and your company, in order to meet its business needs, might end up working with multiple cloud providers. So that also increases the need for identity management. So essentially, the more that we move into the cloud, the more that we move into this age where there's so many more services offered on the cloud, the greater the need for identity management to be able to manage these different levels of authentication authorization. So here I'm going to just walk through a couple of cloud identity scenarios, and these are very simple, but but it's you'll see that this is a pretty simple theme to follow, and that most of the different cloud identity scenarios you'll see will fall into one of these different categories. So one category is separate identities. So that's by default. That's where we all are. That means that every cloud entity that you actually interact with, you have to manage the passwords and usernames separately. You have to manage any authorization for that separately. So then another scenario, which is a little better, is identity synchronization, which we often refer to as same sign-on. So what that means is that you have synchronization software. And the synchronization software quite simply synchronizes the usernames and passwords between multiple security bodies. So what that means is that you sign in using the same username and password into different areas. You're still using the same username and password. Now, in reality, on the back end, those different systems have separate usernames and passwords. They are not one system. They are separate systems that are not connected. But the synchronization allows it to be transparent to the end user. So typically, identity synchronization is a little bit easier to deploy than the next solution I'm going to talk about, which is federated identity. So federated identity is kind of the Cadillac solution. It's the ideal place where a lot of things are moving, but it's a little bit more complex to deploy, at least at the current time. So federated identity means that the account directories actually trust each other, that there's an actual issuing body that actually issues the credential, and that the other bodies actually trust that credential. So federated identity gets a lot closer to the analogy I used of the driver's license earlier on, because that means that there's an issuing body that's actually being trusted. So what that means is that with a single account, you can actually access multiple resources, because that account is actually recognized by that other directory that you're accessing. So federated identity is a great solution. It is the most complex to deploy, though it's certainly getting easier, but of the three scenarios, it's the most complex. So next, we're going to transition and talk to some of these concepts from a Microsoft point of view and explain how Microsoft has some cloud solutions that address some of these scenarios. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Dean. And Dean, you can take over as presenter if you like.
Thank you, Andy. My name's Dean Murray. I'm a cloud solutions architect for Cloud Strategies. My job is to help customers deploy Office 365 and move their email and other services up to Office 365. So I'm going to talk to you about some core identity scenarios here. In the next couple slides, we'll look at those. These identity scenarios include, first, cloud identity. And Andy kind of talked about this from a conceptual point of view. We're going to take this and actually make this real within Microsoft's implementation. So this single identity, great for companies like Cloud Strategies, where we're spread across the United States. We don't have one, although we do have a headquarters, we don't have one geographic place that all of us live. And we don't have a Windows Active Directory environment. We do everything in the cloud. That works for us. There's other companies that have, as Andy stated, have a pretty big investment in that Active Directory environment. They want to take what they've already done and invested in and synchronize that up to the cloud. And with Microsoft specifically, there's a DirSync and actually a password synchronization software available with Windows Azure Active Directory. This takes your on-premise identity and makes a copy of that, synchronizes it up to the cloud, so that users have one password when they access both of those. We'll get into some more detail around this in the next slide, so I'll tell you some pros and cons of these as well. But we call this, you'll hear that referred to as same sign-on as well. And finally, there's the federated identity option. With Microsoft, that's Active Directory Federation Services. It involves a federation trust with Office 365 or with other providers or other cloud solutions. It involves directory synchronization as well. And it's from that on-premise identity, so that you've got one federated identity. You're logging into that identity, and then you're using a token, essentially, to connect up to, for instance, Office 365 to make that connection. Let's drill into these a little bit more. So first, we will start with cloud identity. As stated a couple times here, that's appropriate for smaller organizations without an AD on-premise. You get a rich experience with Office 365 apps. You get ease of deployment and management. You've only got one place for those identities to live, up in the cloud there. It's a lower cost. There's no additional servers required, so you don't have to have server hardware on-prem. And you've got high availability and reliability as all those identities are up in the cloud. The cons, there are some scenarios where even customers of this size might need single sign-on. One of those instances would be with two-factor authentication. In addition, this does, if you've got Active Directory there, it does add an additional set of credentials. So it's something to look at as you go through this and evaluate for your organization. The next is this identity synchronization or Windows Azure Active Directory with identity synchronization and password synchronization. This is appropriate for organizations with AD on-prem. The pros there are that those identities are created and managed locally on-prem in your Active Directory. There are some exceptions to that, and usually when we do planning workshops with customers, we're looking for those exceptions. That's one of the things that we have to look at. For instance, if you've got groups that are managed by local users, you might have to do something to work through that during your planning and design sessions as you move. So there's examples of that where you need to look at that, you need to plan for that, and make sure that you've got that ready to go. It does enable coexistence scenarios. This is a basis for both this identity synchronization and Active Directory Federation. So you have to implement this in either case. And it enables password synchronization as well. That's something new from Microsoft. They recently, within the last year, implemented that. The cons to this, no single sign-on, no two-factor authentication, and it adds that additional, it could add an additional set of credentials. In most cases, you're caching those credentials. So for instance, if you're logging into Outlook, and you have your local AD, you'll have the same password as the other word for this that we mentioned was same sign-on. So you have the same username and password up in Office 365. The users will know what that is, but they will have to do an additional login there. So there's a couple cons in that to look at. Many of our customers look at this. They look at the cons in the next scenario, federated identity, which, as Andy mentioned, is kind of the Cadillac. This is for larger organizations with AD on-prem. You've got some pros with that single identity, that one sign-on for on-premises and Office 365 services or other services. So those identities get mastered on-prem. They get synchronized up with the Windows Azure Active Directory synchronization product, and then you use that single point of identity to license or to access Office 365. Client access control is all based on your IP address, your local Active Directory environment. The cons of this, probably the biggest con, and why we've seen some customers not implement this or even a couple move away from it, is the high availability server deployment required. This is essentially requires high availability. If you don't have that, it is a single point of failure. It is something that you need to plan carefully, and there is additional server hardware that's required. So, in addition to those, this ADFS federation option, there are other federation options that are available. There's third-party availability, and I've got a list of those on the next slide for you that you can look at. This is, again, suitable for medium and large organizations. We've got some customers that we're working with today who have, or who are implementing third-party federation options as opposed to ADFS. And the reason that we see some customers do that is these third parties, in a lot of cases, have packaged up access to other systems. So they've already got pre-packaged offerings that are available. Finally, there's Shibboleth, which is available. We see that primarily with our customers in educational organizations and implemented there. So this is really to make you aware that ADFS, great option, one way for you to do that, but there are other options as well for that. Okay, so let's look at some of those other options there. There's a list over there. CA Technologies, Ping, IBM Software has an option. Just a number of vendors there who work with Office 365 as third-party identity providers. One other thing I'll mention, just from a trending perspective, is that Microsoft is stepping into this space as well to provide single sign-on and same sign-on with Windows Azure Active Directory. And this is pretty new. This is just offered. In fact, Microsoft has a premium version of this that is in preview, is not even available yet. You can do some searches for this using Bing, and you can find, if you search for Windows Azure Active Directory Premium, you'll find out more information about this. You'll see that it's available in 2 tiers. There's a free version and a premium version. You will notice that right now, even today, SSO for other software as a service applications and cloud-based custom applications is included. Microsoft is busy building that list of pre-packaged connections. So you'll see things like Box.com and other cloud providers that Microsoft is providing this identity management with. So that's new, exciting, something that Microsoft is working on as we are talking about it. And this would be kind of a list of a user experience of what you would see. So you'll notice Box, Cisco WebEx, etc., GoToMeeting, all these different options that Microsoft has there where they're integrating those identities with Windows Azure Active Directory in this new offering that's available. So pretty exciting, something that's coming. We're not going to go into depth in this presentation on that, but it's something that we as a partner would be happy to help you with. So let's talk about defining that successful identity strategy and what we've seen with our customers who are successful. These are the things that we've seen them do. We go in and do strategic alignment workshops or planning workshops with customers. And one of the key things that I see there, and I've done hundreds of those, is that involving key stakeholders is a key part of that. If you don't get the right people in the room, a lot of times we have done those online, but we do those in person. And if you don't get the right people in the room, it makes it very difficult to have a successful project. So involving those key stakeholders, getting a champion, getting a sponsor that's key, that's really going to be very important in helping you to define a successful identity strategy. Then assessing the needs of your organization and doing that gap analysis, performance analysis, where you are today, where you need to be, bringing someone in who's an expert in that area, who has experience in it, and helping you to actually do that assessment is another area where we found that customers that are successful with this spend the time up front to do that. We find that time invested pays back about 10 to 1. So for every hour you spend, you're going to save 10 hours on that back end on the deployment timeline. Another important thing is to consider current and future requirements. A lot of these things can be phased in. You don't have to do them all at once. But you do need to keep those future requirements in mind as you go forward. And then finally, work with a trusted partner. Get someone as a partner that you trust, who has the experience in this, and who can help you out and help you define and implement a successful identity strategy. So I want to thank you for your time on this. I hope that you've learned something from it, or you've got some food for thought and some areas that you can look at and that you can move forward on in your quest to define and implement a successful identity strategy. And at this point, I think we can take some questions.
Sure. Hi, Dean, and Andy, thanks to you too. A question, I have a couple questions that came in here. The first is, what trends are you seeing in terms of your clients? What solutions do they typically use?
So we're seeing a couple things here. One is now that Microsoft has implemented directory synchronization with password sync, we saw a number of customers make the move back from Active Directory Federation services and towards that. Just the hardware requirements of ADFS with a minimum of 2 ADFS servers, 2 ADFS proxies. We are seeing customers explore some of these other identity management providers, and I think that's why Microsoft is seeing that trend as well and stepping up and saying, we want to play in this space as well. So those are really the trends that I'm seeing, is just the number of passwords that people have to deal with today is astounding. And so, from a security point of view, the more that you can get that into a manageable identity management solution, it's going to work for you.
So similar then, if the second question maybe ties back, you say you've seen businesses go a little bit more in your client base with the dir sync with password sync or the same sign-on. Is that why you've mentioned that the federated identity is a Cadillac solution, and are people actually embracing it, or why would they embrace that on top of dir sync?
Yeah, so there are people that are doing ADFS, and when we look at that requirements analysis, if that is something that meets the customer's requirements for things like two-factor authentication, there's another great scenario, which is if a customer needs to do hybrid search in SharePoint 2013, you can have SharePoint 2013 in the cloud and SharePoint 2013 on-prem, and you can do hybrid search across those two environments with ADFS. You cannot do that with, dir sync with password sync. So there are some scenarios where we're seeing with larger customers typically, but enterprise customers who need to some of these specific requirements that are implementing ADFS.
Great, thank you, Dean.
Any other questions? Andy, you want to wrap this up?
Certainly. Thanks again, everyone, for your time today and for attending. We will certainly have more webinars coming your way on some other key topics in the near future. So thanks again for joining us, and please join us again soon.